Good evening, dear ladies and gentlemen. I'm Giga Revazashvili. I'm studying at the Faculty of Political Science or the MSU. Today, I'm going to talk about one of the most acute topics of international politics. The thing is about so-called Kremlin list, which was compiled against the 210 people from the inner circle of Vladimir Putin. First of all, let's talk about the reasons of the compilation of Kremlin list. If you know, the foundation of this list, which was compiled in the end of January 2018, is Act 722. The document which is aimed for countering Iranian and Russian governments' aggression. The essence is that not later than 180 days from the time when the law of sanctions was accepted in US Congress on the 2nd of August 2017, the Secretary of Treasury, cooperating with the appropriate congressional committees, should promulgate a detailed report on senior political figures and oligarchs in the Russian Federation about the definition of the degree of their closeness to the Russian regime, about the identification of any acts of corruption crimes committed by those individuals, also the estimation of net worth and the sources of income of those individuals and their family members, and finally the assessment of likely effects of imposing debt and equity restrictions on Russian parastatal entities which are owned by public officials or Russian ruling class. Also, this document mentions that it is Russian Federation which is suggested to be responsible for ongoing war in East Ukraine, applying also, it is suggested to continue to apply traditional uses of force, intelligence operations, and influence campaigns to the countries of Europe and Eurasia, such as Georgia and Ukraine, and the US President should call on the government of the Russian Federation to withdraw all of its forces from the territories of Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, to return control of the borders of those territories to the respective governments, and to cease all efforts to undermine the popularly elected governments of these countries. In other words, the thing is about that the United States declared a new war of sanctions against Russia. The official reason of the compilation of Act 722 is allegedly the intervention of Russia into US presidential elections 2016, but in fact, discussion about new restrictions against Russia happened because the latter refused recon with the foreign political line of the US and preferred to carry out its own want to assert its national interests everywhere. And now this is the right time to call the main aspects of the so-called Kremlin list. If we proceed to it, we can see that it was compiled in the base of Act 722 mentioned above and consists of two separate lists. The first one is a list of senior political figures where 114 individuals are present, including Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, Foreign Affairs Minister Sergei Lavrov, and Presidential Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov. The second one features 96 business executives, including many of Russia's top oligarchs, such as football club Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich. Of a total 210 individuals on this list, about 22 have already been hit with sanctions by the United States. What about the result of the promulgation? The broad variety on the list quickly became a joke among Russian critics who accused the Treasury of simply writing the Kremlin phone book. Soon after the Kremlin list was made public, observers began to know that much of it appeared to almost exactly match two publicly available resources: the Kremlin official list of top officials and Forbes magazine's 2017 list of the wealthiest Russian business executives. Anders Eslund, an economist with the Atlantic, who had previously been reported to be helping compile the list, recognized the fact of that Act 722 and the list of Russian officials and oligarchs read simply like the Russian elite. This makes little sense. It offers no incentives to senior Russian political figures to behave well. In other words, at least Russian oligarchs who made their money in a corrupted way, with their from their ties with Vladimir Putin, was compiled by the US government agencies, but then cancelled last week by a senior administration official. It was replaced by an all-inclusive list of rich Russians, apparently copied straight from the Forbes magazine's ranking of wealthy Russians, together with the names of some top Kremlin officials. And if we talk about the background of the story of new sanctions against Russia, it is clear that the Act 722 was one of the first pieces of major legislation that Congress sent to Trump, who has refused to acknowledge Russia's meddling into U.S. presidential elections 2016, and has cast doubt on the consensus opinion of U.S. intelligence agencies that Moscow did so. The act passed with broad bipartisan support, though Trump signed it into law reluctantly. Among other things, the law limits the president's ability to remove sanctions on Russia without lawmakers' approval. It also set two deadlines. And if we talk about reactions on this case of other people, we can see that Trump administration critics said that it is the Trump administration who had a decision to make whether they would follow the law and crack down on those responsible for attacking American democracy in 2016. But Donald Trump instead chose to let Russia off the hook yet again. In its turn, Moscow had warned the US not go ahead with publication and declared that this step was a direct and obvious attempt by the US to interfere in Russia's upcoming presidential vote in March. And Alex Brito, director of the program covering Russia, Eurasia, and Ukraine, and the Eurasia Group, said whether Russians were worried about the impact of the report, whether Russians are reported to be lobbying heavily in Washington, seeking legal advice regarding their foreign investments, and try to distance themselves from the Kremlin, Brito said in a report before the US list was published. And to sum up, we can say that all steps made by US establishment about the imposition of new restrictions against Russia clearly demonstrate that America doesn't want to deal with the Russian government anymore and recommends key Western companies to refrain from cooperation with them. Otherwise, it will face serious problems. Also, these measures are specific tools designed for solving controversies emerged within US political elite at the background of refusal of Donald Trump to recognize Russia's meddling into US elections 2016. But it is worth saying that if we link this case with other ones, such as Navalny's protests in Russia and Dobby's scandal that led to the decision banning Russia's flag in Olympic Games in Pyeongchang, it will be clear that the Western community is interested in shaking political situation in Russia and doing everything possible to force Vladimir Putin to resign. Thank you very much for your attention and see you soon. Bye bye.